Hi, I'm Amy Catapan, and I'm happy to be here with Shalom World TV and our guest, Richard Akins, who has just written the book Challenge to Grow, a Catholic parent growing through the challenges of an evangelical world. Richard is a father of 3 and currently lives in Wheaton, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. He was born and raised Catholic in upstate New York and has an electrical engineering degree and an MBA from the University of Illinois. He has been widely published in the technology field and owns 6 patents in fiber optics. In 2004, he began attending an evangelical church every other weekend for family reasons and wrote several books about the experience. His new book, Challenge to Grow, was released in mid-June 2018 through New City Press. He's been active in the fields of Catholic education and ecumenism for the past 5 years. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it.
It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Let's start with talking a little bit about your faith journey and how maybe it led to becoming a writer of Catholic books.
Well, I was born in New York, so my parents, on my mother's side is half Polish and Italian, so very strong Catholic upbringing. My dad was in the seminary, my grandfather was in the seminary before the war, my uncle was in the seminary. My aunt earned her doctorate, and she's a nun and is currently a president of a Catholic university. So we had a very strong, intellectual upbringing in the faith, as well as just a very loving upbringing with my mother and my grandmother, with the Italian, always big meals and a lot of great discussion. And
that's
so
something
forth.
I can relate to a lot too, coming from an Italian family as well.
Yep. So, but I also, from a ecumenical standpoint, I never remember anybody in my family ever pointing to a non-Catholic and saying that that's someone we can't talk to. They were very open and loving from that standpoint.
I'm really happy to talk about this book. Did you have any struggles then early on with your Catholic faith? Was it always very strong?
Yeah. So I don't remember ever having a real struggle with my faith. Being from New York, the only time I ever doubted God was when the Red Sox beat the Yankees.
Right.
But other than that, very strong faith throughout. And what I realize now that I've been exposed to evangelicals and Protestants is that they have a lot of questions about the Catholic faith. And some of those questions I had never really thought about. And most of them were things such as the doctrines of Mary and purgatory and so forth. And some of those, as I grew up as Catholic, I didn't feel like I had to understand everything of the faith, right? If some of these things, I think I probably just pushed off as being maybe leftovers of the Middle Ages, and they were true, but I didn't really have to dive into them too deeply at that point. But other than that, I didn't really ever have a problem with the Catholic faith.
So when did you first encounter evangelicals? When did you kind of get into that world and then maybe start seeing Catholicism from another perspective?
So we moved to Wheaton, Illinois, and Wheaton is the home of Wheaton College, which is the hotbed of evangelical thought. When I moved there was 45,000 people in the city and 52 churches. So it was the highest percentage of churches in the country, I guess, at that point. And fortunately, as I moved in, I played football, and my best friend on the team took me under his wing, and he lived here, and he was an evangelical Christian. So he and his family were very open. We had meals there, slept over, did all kinds of stuff together, and never had a feeling from them that they saw me as anything less because I was Catholic. So it was good that was my first experience with it. And then Wheaton College had kind of graduate level missionaries that would go out, and I became part of this group in high school called the Salt Company. And I didn't really know much about it, but we would go once a week with some friends, and we'd have songs and Bible readings and that type of thing. It was at that age that was very encouraging. That you could spend that time and see your friends also believed in Jesus. And they didn't really get too much into any type of denominational discussions. So I think I had a pretty good background in that I didn't feel any conflict all the way through high school and college.
So take me to the point now where you're attending evangelical services. How did that begin, and then where did that lead?
We had three kids, and my wife, she began to do an interdenominational Bible study. So then she wanted to go to this evangelical church that was hosting this Bible study. So I did what normal people would do. I ignored it, installed, and didn't know what to do. And then, after a while, we agreed that every other week we go to an evangelical service, and then on opposite weekends we go to Catholic Mass. So that went on for about 12 years. And during that process, that was when the writing began.
So you're an engineer, that's your background. You don't have a degree in theology. Did you have any struggles or doubts in writing this? Because sometimes, we go through what some people call imposter syndrome, like, oh, who am I? Why is God calling me to do this? I have no business writing this book or hosting a TV show. Why is God calling me to do this? Did you have any struggles like that? Any imposter syndrome going on?
Not until now.
Oh, okay. Great, I brought it on.
What's nice in the Catholic world, because I probably wouldn't have gotten this far without it, is in the Catholic world, every diocese has a theological censor. So that's the person that knows the theology, and you can send your book in, and they read the book. And they give you, it used to be called imprimatur, so now it's called permission to publish. And basically, it doesn't say, it could be the worst book in the world, but as long as it doesn't have any heresy in it, as long as it's true to the faith, you can get permission to publish. And then my censor was a Father Bailiff out of West Chicago, and I got to meet with him and go through the book. So he had 2 or 3 things that he wanted me to just change in the book, which become, things that you've gone through 20 times when you edit your book, and then you don't realize this is how it actually read to an outsider. So those were very helpful. But to be able to have the confidence that somebody actually knows the theology, approved what you said, that you didn't get anything wrong, and that was a big pat, not a pat on the back, that was a great reassurance for me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I would have felt, like I know a lot of evangelical and Protestant authors, and I always ask them that question, like, are you nervous because you're saying things and you have no authority above you to say whether you're right or wrong? All right, so I think that's been very helpful for me.
Yeah, and nice for the readers to know too, that you kind of have had it vetted, and they can read it with confidence as well.
Exactly.
I got to tell you, when I saw the title of your book and they asked me to interview you, my first reaction was, uh-oh. Is this going to get me in trouble with my evangelical friends? Because like you, I have evangelical Christian friends. I met mine through the American Christian fiction writers, many of whom are from the Wheaton area and evangelical. So what would you say to somebody who's like, I don't know, maybe they didn't have the good experience that you had with evangelicals when you were younger, and now they're looking at your book and they're thinking, I don't know, this might be too hot of a topic for me to touch. What would you say to say, no, it's okay, here's what I'm trying to accomplish with this book?
Well, the 2 themes in the book are, one is ecumenism, which means kind of a push for Christian unity. And a lot of people don't understand what that means. It's not necessarily we're trying to push for Christian union, meaning everybody comes back to one church. That's way above our pay grade as lay people. But it's just the standpoint that we can talk to each other and work together on social issues or whatever else, helping the poor and whatnot, and see each other as being Christ followers together. So the first thing I try to do, because there is a branch within the ecumenical or the evangelical world that is anti-Catholic, that do not believe that Catholics are actually Christian, and so I try to break down that barrier in the book first, and then the second part was when I first went to these churches and I heard those type of anti-Catholic comments, the challenges they brought up I had never heard before, or I never really took seriously before, because we're all brought up in our own faith, and when we're brought up in our own faith, we learn that faith, but we never learn what other people think about the faith, and we certainly are never taught how to answer those questions. And I didn't have a resource to go to that I found with those answers. So that was kind of trial by error. I was trying to figure out how to do that. So the second part of the major thrust of the book is to teach other Catholics, here are the challenges you're going to face or your kids are going to face at some point, and here's how to address those without being antagonistic and leading to conflict. So that's the 2 goals for the book.
So would you say it's mostly for those kind of cradle Catholics who don't know how to respond? Could it be appropriate for Catholic converts, or maybe even for evangelicals who want to maybe know the flip side of the story?
Right. I think all 3 from the standpoint that cradle Catholics, most of us, were trained at church school, CCD, until we're confirmed. right? So in my mind, looking back at it now, I had that confirmation was in 8th grade. So I had answers that were from an 8th grade mind. And now I'm facing adult evangelicals who are saying, well, what about this? What about this? And so I'm trying to come up with adult answers to those questions. And a previous version of this information was in a book that was given out to a lot of, from this one parish to their RCIA graduates, because the idea was these RCIA graduates are new Catholics. Their training now is ended, so we need to give them something to keep them growing in their faith, because they still have friends and family who are not Catholics, and they're going to keep bringing up these questions. So those are the two that we're trying to address. And then, as an example, we just finished an ecumenical conference in Wisconsin, and it was really interesting to see a couple evangelicals and a couple Catholics over meals talking. And it wasn't that any of the Catholics are trying to convert the evangelical, but just to see at the end of the conference that they understood the Catholics better and they could accept us better as fellow Christians.
So it's about building those bridges, right?
It
Opening
is.
up that dialogue so we can have good conversations. Well,
Right.
that sounds like a great...
Sometimes, we like to put ourselves in camps and oppose one another. And he really tries to understand the other side and present it and see what's true in it and what's valuable in it. And the book is very relevant today because a lot of Christians are marrying across denominational lines. Now, just so you know, as Catholics, we don't really consider ourselves a denomination. And they have to learn how to live their faith together, even when they have differences. So the book is very helpful in that way. At the same time, it's not trying to pretend that there aren't real differences and that they aren't important. When we do that, we really are not being respectful of people's points of view. There are different points of view, and people hold them for real reasons. If we can try and understand the other side, we'll usually come to appreciate their point of view, even if we might not be able to buy into it because we have a different one. And so his book can be particularly helpful from his own experience of working that out in his own family from a very thoughtful and a theological point of view. But some of the questions that come up in the book are just very hard to solve. Whenever you talk about human freedom and how it relates to God's grace, if you talk long enough, you're going to make a mistake. Any couple that shares both an evangelical Christian experience and a Catholic experience, and I don't think those are mutually exclusive at all, it would be helpful to them because it really does point out the differences between the churches and what we have in common. Too often, of course, we want to get in a battle and we want to win. The better choice is to want to understand each other. And the book can help with that.
Can you talk a bit about the importance of the Eucharist? I know there's a section here where you talk about the Mass and some of the different beliefs between Catholics and evangelicals with the real presence in the Eucharist. Can you talk about why that's so important to address in your book?
Yeah, I think that that was the hardest part of the book to write because I was scared to death of it. Because we as Catholics, we know what it is, but I don't know if we really think through why and what the reasons are, or how to explain it to someone else. So I was blessed, I think, going to the evangelical church for that long, because the evangelicals, my experience is that they have what's called the Lord's table or the Lord's Supper. And it's usually about once a month. And the church we went to is a little plastic cup of grape juice and a little cracker. And I think they do it very sincerely out of obedience. They don't really know why they're doing it or why Jesus in the Last Supper asked us to do it, but it's there, so they have to do it at some point. So they just see it as a remembering that Jesus was went to the cross and so forth. And I think that kind of cuts it very short as far as what the Eucharist means. And Catholics, if you're like me, I always grew up thinking of the Eucharist as something that was benefiting me, right? It was something that I did, and Jesus was coming and giving me grace through this Eucharist. And I think that's 100% correct. But as I try to explain to evangelicals what it really meant, I started to think through the process, and I think there's something we're all kind of missing a little bit, which is that Jesus, if he just wanted to be a spiritual leader to us, he could have just written a book and handed it to the Pharisees.
Right. Would have been a lot easier, right?
Yeah. Or he could have just sent another prophet. If he wanted to just be our sacrificial lamb on the cross, he could have just been born and went right to the cross and sacrificed himself. But he didn't do that, right? He lived a human life. And for those 3 years, at least, we know he had human friends and shared meals with them and gave them a hug and gave them a kiss on the cheek and shook their hands. And, you can imagine people were distressed and he let somebody cry on his shoulder and whatnot, because that's what we do as human beings, right? That's part of our life. And that got me thinking that, he loves you just as much as he loved St. Peter. He loves me just as much as he loved, Mary and Martha and Lazarus and whoever else. So why would he not want that same kind of physical relationship with us, right? So that got me thinking that at the Last Supper, when Jesus lifts up that bread, he's telling his apostles, he already told them he's going to be with us till the end of the age, right? So he wants to hold that up, and he says, this is physical, this bread and this wine, this is how I'm going to be with you physically till the end of time. And because I love everybody that's going to come after you and after my resurrection. Because you think about it, even after the resurrection, he didn't come back as a ghost. He came back physically.
Physical form,
right?
Yeah. Touch me.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that got me more impassioned to when I see the priest lifting up the host and the chalice and consecrating the bread and wine. In my mind now, it's Jesus coming down from heaven with his arms open saying, I want a hug. And the Catholic Church is easier because you can see him on the crucifix.
Mm-hmm.
You just imagine Jesus there coming down and saying, I love you as much as I loved John and Peter, and I came back from dead and gave him a big hug. And I want that from you too. And so that turned it around for me to think, it's as much for Jesus as it is for us, right? It's not just selfishly that we want the power and grace from Jesus. There's more to it than that. And I think how that plays into evangelicals is I don't think there's an evangelical or Protestant in the world who could sit there if they thought this way and said, Jesus is there with his arms open, wanting a hug, and no thanks, I'm not going to do it. So I think that's kind of how I've been trying to explain it to evangelicals who have been brought up not understanding the Catholic view of the Eucharist.
Yeah, we really do seem to have a need for the physical in the Catholic faith, right?
We
All of
do.
our sacramentals. There's always the smells and the bells,
Exactly,
right? That they
exactly,
talk about.
yep.
We need that physical. And so I think that's a beautiful way to think of the Eucharist as that physical relationship with Jesus. And we need to spend time with people if we want to have that personal relationship, right? That we're always supposed to have
That's right.
with him. So your book isn't really aimed to be a hard sell to try to convert people one way or another. At least it didn't seem that way as I was reading it. So how can it be a platform for fostering some openness, some enlightenment between the different denominations of Christianity while focusing on common goals? Can you talk a bit about that, how it can be a platform for that without being the hard sell?
Yeah, it took me a while when I got involved with the ecumenical process to understand what was going on there, because people are concerned about it. And I think on both sides, on all sides, because it's Orthodox, it's Lutherans, it's Presbyterians, it's Baptists, it's everybody. And most of the concerns are, I'm going in there and somebody's going to try to convert me to their part of the faith, right? So Catholics don't do that in the ecumenical process. We're in there trying to build bridges with other people. And when I first went to the Evangelical Church, I really had a lot of doubts, like, am I doing the right thing here? Even though I'm trying to keep the family together, am I doing the right thing? And when you read the Catechism, that's what kind of cleared it up for me. Because if you read, I think it's paragraph 970, it talks about the fact that as Catholics, we accept anybody that's validly baptized, which means anybody that's baptized in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And we believe they're all part of our church. They're all part of the Catholic Church with the small c, right? The universal church. Even if they don't accept us or they're not in full communion with us. So an ecumenical mindset basically says, I can sit across from somebody that's evangelical or Orthodox or whatever. I may disagree with them on 1,000 different points, but I still think that they can make it to heaven. And I think that I'm going to spend eternity with them in heaven, and therefore that makes your relationship totally different. So that's all we're trying to accomplish at the level of a lay person, is trying to build those relationships up. And with evangelicals, it's difficult because some of them don't think we're Christian. And so we're approaching it as ecumenism. They're approaching it as interreligious dialogue, like we're Muslim or Jewish or whatever. Because the task there is just in the book is to lay out, here's the questions you have, why you think we're not Christian. Here's the answer to why we actually are, and you can accept us as Christians. We do believe in Jesus. We do believe in the gospel. We do believe in the Bible and so forth.
Yeah. So if an evangelical did pick up your book, that's what they could get out of it, is maybe getting some of those misconceptions about why we are really followers of Christ.
Exactly.
Kind of cleared up.
Yeah, and I think the church we went to had a balcony, and as a good Catholic, we sit in the back. So I sat in the balcony.
Right, sinners in the back, I like to say.
But they have very comfortable chairs, and we sat up there, and I remember when we first went there, I could have sat up there with my arms crossed going, this is a bunch of baloney.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I tried to hear them and listen, trying to learn from them instead of judging them, and condemning them at that point.
Yeah, great. So some people might be a little bit worried that if we try to have this open dialogue, we might somehow water down our faith. And I love this one saying that you had, I think it was in chapter 2. I have friends of both sides of the argument, and I stand by my friends, right? How do we balance this? How can we open ourselves up to dialogue and not water down our faith? Are there examples of Catholics out there who are doing just this thing that we can turn to and say, here's how you can have open dialogue without losing the rich traditions of the Catholic faith?
The gentleman that's on the back, blurb on the back of the book, one of the two is he was an evangelical pastor from Alabama by the name of John Armstrong. And he was very anti-Catholic at one point. And then he had read John chapter 17, verse 21, which is from the upper room night before night before he was crucified. And he's praying to the Father, and he says, I'm praying for all those who will believe what the apostles are teaching. May they all be one as we're one, right? So that's the central verse of the ecumenical process. And he says why? He says we have to be one and show the world that we're in unity, because that's how the world's going to know that you, Father, have sent me as your Son. Because if the Christians are separated and fighting each other, a non-Christian's not going to believe. So that was kind of the process, and John Armstrong had started what was called a cohort. So we went through a year-long process with them. There was 10 of us, and there was a Catholic priest, and then a Catholic from Uganda who's got doctorates in theology. And I can tell you, as we went through that, and there's 7 Protestants there, as we went through that year-long process, none of the 3 of us watered down the faith at all. When the questions came up, we told exactly what Catholics' teaching is. And I can't say that any of them turned Catholic, but all of them had a better, much fuller acceptance of us at the end. So I think especially the evangelicals, the last thing you want to do is water down what you believe, because then they won't take you seriously at all, because they're serious about their Christian faith, and they want to know that they're dealing with other people that that follow Jesus as Lord. So I think that's very important.
Yeah, we've got to be serious about our faith.
Yeah.
And share that then openly with them.
Yeah, and I think I personally, the writers that kind of led me into this, I'm Polish, so of course John Paul was a saint the minute he was elected, or elevated.
You didn't have to wait?
We didn't have to wait for a second. And my grandfather's basically looked and acted just like him, and he was our saint anyway. So, but his writings, like the Crossing the Threshold of Hope, is fantastic, and every Catholic should read it. It's short, but it's so clear. It's amazing. And then right here in Chicago, we have, he's not here now, but Bishop Robert Barron.
Oh, yeah.
He was from the Archdiocese of Chicago. He's now auxiliary bishop out in Los Angeles. And he is unbelievable online. He's got this Word on Fire ministry. And he has a video series called Catholicism, and there's a whole episode is on YouTube for free. So I think every Catholic should show that to their kids, and that's the way I've done it to try to get my kids to first just put a couple Catholic apps on their phone, like Shalom World app.
Yeah.
And then said, oh, I know this guy, I'm in this cohort with this particular guy. Watch a couple of his videos. It's really cool. And then that's about as far as you have to go. And then hopefully get them engaged a little bit more.
Yeah, and video can be such a great method of evangelization with young people in particular who tend to go to YouTube to search for anything before Google even. So
that's right. That's right.
That's great that you mentioned those examples. Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today, sharing your book and your experiences. I think a lot of people will get a lot out of it about just how to open up to dialogue and have these honest conversations without feeling like they have to water down their own side.
Fantastic.
So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us as well. May God bless all of your reading.
If you have good news, we expect you to want to share it. Salvation in Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who for love of us and for our salvation came down from heaven. Salvation in His name, and He is the only Savior, is what we are on earth for. Therefore, all those who spread the good news of salvation in Jesus Christ, we should encourage them. I can speak, but how many people can I reach alone? But the media, the television people, the radio, the newspapers, and all those who use the computer and its derivatives in various ways to spread the gospel, we must thank them, we must encourage them, we must work with them so that they can continue to spread the good news. There's so much news that is not so wonderful in the world, but there is also news that is wonderful on the gospel of Jesus Christ. We encourage them and beg God to bless them, especially the Shalom World TV. God bless you.